The world's on the edge of war, and this time it's not Russia or the Middle East. There's a new showdown brewing, one that could leave millions dead, wreck global markets, and cripple trade. It's the US facing off against China, with North Korea waiting in the wings, and if things blow up, it could drag half the planet with it. On today's episode of the Infographics Show, we're breaking down China and North Korea versus the United States, and who actually comes out on top. For decades, the US has fielded the world's most advanced military and a capacity to project power globally that is second to none. But that supremacy is being challenged. China now commands a massive, fast-modernizing military built for a new kind of war, one with drones, hypersonic missiles, and cyber warfare. And right next door is the unstable North Korea and its nuclear ambitions. Relations between the two nations haven't always been smooth, so how likely is it that China and North Korea would join forces in combat against the US? Well, if the US or its allies fired first, it is very likely. China and North Korea have had a mutual defense pact since 1961. It states that if one of the two nations were attacked, the other would immediately provide military and other assistance to the best of its ability. But if North Korea decides to go rogue and strike at the US, China might not be so eager to back its volatile neighbor. And history backs this up. In 2010, when North Korea shelled a South Korean island, killing 2 Marines and 2 civilians, South Korea fired back hard. There were dozens of North Korean casualties, and Beijing wanted no part of the chaos. China even warned Pyongyang it wouldn't step in to save it. On the other hand, North Korea would probably be happy to come to China's aid, regardless of who fired first. North Korea has a similar mutual defense pact with Russia. This agreement states that if one of the nations is attacked, the other must deploy, quote, all means at its disposal without delay to provide military and other assistance. During Russia's invasion of Ukraine, North Korea reportedly sent artillery systems, missiles, and even around 10,000 troops, officially to help repel a Ukrainian advance into Russia's Kursk region in 2023 and 2024. It was one of Pyongyang's most direct shows of military backing for Moscow in decades. The US, meanwhile, has collective defense agreements with 6 countries in the Asia-Pacific region: South Korea, Japan, Australia, New Zealand, Thailand, and the Philippines. It also has mutual defense agreements with multiple Central, South American, and Caribbean nations under the 1947 Rio Treaty. And then there's NATO's Article 5. That essentially states that an attack on a member of the alliance is considered to be an attack against all of them. Article 5 has been invoked once, in the aftermath of the 9/11 attacks back in 2001. If China and North Korea attacked the US, it would mark the second time this provision had been invoked, and it would instantly test a web of defense treaties that could turn a regional fight into a global war. But let's stick with how the militaries of these countries compare. When it comes to sheer manpower, China and North Korea hold a significant advantage. In terms of total military personnel, the US has around 1.3 million active duty members, compared to China's approximately 2 million, and North Korea, meanwhile, has about 1.3 million. That gives the two nations a standing army 3.6 times the size of the US's. China and North Korea both require roughly 2 years of military service. The US doesn't, giving the Asian powers a far larger pool of ready soldiers if war breaks out. In other words, it's easier for China and North Korea to boost their ranks if it breaks out. China has roughly 626 million males between the age of 18 and 55, about 1.5 times the entire population of the United States. But numbers alone don't win wars. You need the skills to match. Not everyone in uniform is a fighter. In all 3 militaries, millions serve in support, handling logistics, paperwork, or guarding borders. But when it comes to training and gear, the US dominates. Its troops are better trained than China's and light years ahead of North Korea's. The US forces are also more experienced in actual combat than the Chinese and North Koreans combined. Apart from the small deployment to Kursk and the occasional skirmish across the demilitarized zone, North Korea hasn't seen real combat since the Korean War ended in 1953. China's last major conflict was the Vietnam War. Sure, China and Vietnam clashed off and on until 1979, but those fights were small and involved only a small portion of China's army. Since then, the only real action China's military has seen is a few border spats with India, standoffs with the Philippine Navy, and the occasional UN peacekeeping mission. It hardly screams battle-ready. The US military, on the other hand, has been collecting wars like baseball cards. It's seen action in at least a dozen countries, Afghanistan, Iraq, Iran, Somalia, Yugoslavia, Haiti, even the waters off Venezuela. Thanks to its network of overseas bases, huge portions of the U.S. military have real experience operating in foreign and sometimes hostile locations. It has at least 128 bases spread across 49 countries worldwide. China has just one, the port of Dorle in Djibouti, East Africa. And that is one more than North Korea has. But that depends on how you define base. If you count every foreign outpost the U.S. runs, anything it funds, rents, or even just borrows for a while, the total jumps way up. The U.S. has about 877 bases in 95 countries. China? Just 5, located in Cambodia, Myanmar, Tajikistan, Pakistan, and Sri Lanka. China is also planning to set up a major base in the Maldives, a highly strategic location in the Indian Ocean. That would put it dangerously close to one of the most important U.S. bases in the world, Naval Support Facility Diego Garcia. This massive base, jointly run by the UK and the US, has a deep-water port and a 12,000-foot concrete runway capable of supporting the US's most advanced bombers. More on those shortly. It's been used for US bombing missions in Afghanistan, Iraq, and more recently Yemen. The locations of these bases matter when comparing the strength of the US military to a combined Chinese and North Korean force. But distance also matters a lot. Just how far apart are the countries that would actually be involved in a US versus China and North Korea war? The closest point between China and the United States is Attu Island in the Aleutians, around 1,200 miles from Alaska. But getting from China's eastern seaboard to the US mainland, let's say Seattle, adds another couple thousand miles. North Korea is even further from Attu, roughly 2,000 miles. Send an expeditionary force that far against huge armies on the other side, and logistics becomes a massive problem. For either side to successfully pull off a ground invasion, they would have to cross that massive distance with millions of troops, plus all the armor, artillery, engineering, and medical corps that they'll need to support them. Military planners often use a rule of thumb. An attacker needs about a 3-to-1 advantage to succeed in land combat. A review of 600 land battles from 1600 to 1973 found that attackers with a 3-to-1 advantage won roughly 74% of the time. But numbers aren't everything. Terrain, morale, and the balance of firepower can flip a battle on its head. Because the US holds the edge in firepower, any meaningful ground push by China and North Korea would need that 3-to-1 advantage. And that means amassing roughly 3 million troops, more than half their combined manpower. And then they would have to haul those soldiers and mountains of gear, tanks, artillery, ammo, drones, surveillance kit, across the Pacific without breaking the supply line, which makes the chances of an invasion extremely unlikely. It requires logistical capabilities that the Chinese and North Koreans simply do not possess currently. China's in the process of building a fleet of high-tech landing barges for invasion purposes. It also has reportedly started repurposing civilian ferries to move troops and equipment. It's even building floating piers designed for amphibious landings. But those are being built for a conflict with Taiwan in mind, just 80 miles across the Taiwan Strait at its closest point, not California. Of course, the same applies if the US decided to launch a ground invasion of China or North Korea. Even if US firepower cancels out some of the advantages, they would still need something like 5 million soldiers to be sure of taking both countries. That's as likely as 1 million Chinese troops landing on Venice Beach. But war isn't always about conquering the whole place. A few 100,000 well-placed US troops could grab key cities, Beijing, Shanghai, Hong Kong, Pyongyang, and then squeeze their opponents into surrender. And that's where America's network of more than 800 bases gives it a huge edge over the China-North Korea alliance. The US has a heavy presence in Europe and the Middle East, but its most concentrated web of bases is in East Asia, built specifically to contain China and to a lesser extent North Korea. The US maintains dozens of installations in South Korea and Japan, 9 in the Philippines, and crucially a support base in Singapore. This network, called the First Island Chain, was built in 1951 to contain China all the way to its coast. From here, the US can strike deep into Chinese territory. Camp Humphreys in South Korea, America's biggest overseas base, is just 335 miles from Dalian, a Chinese city of 7 million. More importantly, the First Island Chain allows the US to quickly implement a near-total naval blockade of China and, by extension, North Korea. China is heavily dependent on trade and imports brought in by sea, including 60% of its oil. So as well as trapping China and North Korea's navies, cutting off the sea lanes along those islands would hammer China's economy and shut down its war machine fast. China knows this, and that's why it launched the Belt and Road Initiative, a plan to build overland trade routes through Central Asia to dodge a naval blockade. But there is a problem. Ships move a lot more oil than trains ever will. A real blockade will still strangle China's economy fast. And the bad news for China is that the US has also created a second ring of bases around China and is putting the final touches on a third. The second island chain stretches from Japan's Bonin Islands, about 620 miles south of Tokyo, down through Guam, the Carolines, and West Papua. Completing the ring to the south are the US bases in northern Australia near Darwin. The US also has deals with Palau, Micronesia, and the Marshall Islands, giving it exclusive military access. And it is not stopping there. Plans are in motion for a new base in Micronesia and a high-tech radar system in Palau. The third island chain stretches from Alaska's Aleutians to Hawaii and then down through Fiji and New Zealand. Add it to the other two and you've got 3 defensive rings that give the US a huge advantage over China and North Korea. With help from allies like South Korea, Japan, and the Philippines, the US could use those bases to lock down China's sea lanes, cutting off trade, destroying its economy, and keeping the war pinned near its own coast. These bases also let the US deploy and spread out its forces, reducing the risk of losing everything to a single missile strike. Troops and equipment can quietly amass across the region without immediately tipping off China. Thanks to drones, satellites, and spy planes, the age of surprise attacks is essentially over. The US still has the best eyes in the sky, but China is catching up fast. They've launched new satellites and radar that can spot big US movements almost instantly. But America could move troops closer under the cover of training exercises, buying time before Beijing realizes. China and North Korea don't have that luxury, as any big move toward the US would light up on the radar long before it left port. Together, these rings let the US bring its biggest guns right to China and North Korea's front yard. And that is where America dominates, in the air and at sea. Of course, the US shipbuilding industry has fallen way behind China's in recent decades. China has hundreds of active shipyards, at least 35 of which are directly involved in building ships for the Chinese Navy. By contrast, the US has just a handful, and as a result, China has already surpassed the US in terms of number of ships. It can also churn out its Type 52D destroyer in slightly less than half the time it takes for the US to produce a new Arleigh Burke-type destroyer, 1.6 years versus 3 years. However, again, the raw numbers don't paint the full picture. China and North Korea combined might have more ships than the US Navy, but the US's fleet is made up of bigger, heavier vessels that pack a greater punch. The US Navy is also geared up for expeditionary missions, while China and North Korea are more geared for littoral and near-field defense. North Korea's Navy is modest, to say the least, especially compared to the US or China. It fields around 207 vessels in total, including 155 patrol boats and 13 mostly Soviet-era submarines. It can put up a fight defending its shores, but if it took the fight to the US fleet, it would probably be decimated pretty quickly. The Chinese Navy is a different beast, at least within the first island chain. China's Navy has 3 aircraft carriers, 1 with an electromagnetic catapult, and 4 helicopter carriers. The US has 11 full carriers in its fleet, plus 4 helicopter carriers to match. Under the waves, the US dominates. It has around 70 nuclear-powered subs versus China's 60, most of them relics from the Cold War. On the surface, America fields 81 destroyers to China's 50. China's got more of the smaller stuff, including 72 corvettes, but the US ships are bigger, tougher, and they hit a lot harder. So if the US managed to concentrate enough of its naval power in the region, it would almost certainly win a prolonged maritime war of attrition, especially with the world's most powerful air force backing it up. North Korea's air force is tiny compared to the US or China. Most of its aircraft are aging Cold War-era Soviet designs. In total, it fields about 368 fighters, 114 attack aircraft, and 20 attack helicopters, but only around half are believed to be combat-ready. Meanwhile, China's Air Force presents a much more serious challenge. China's Air Force is huge, over 1,200 fighters, plus attack planes, helicopters, and refueling tankers, with about 3/4 ready for action. While a lot of those planes date back to the Cold War, this fleet is becoming rapidly modernized. The new J-10s, J-35s, and stealthy J-20s are joining the fleet, each loaded with high-tech precision weapons. Despite this, the US still maintains a serious edge in the air. Altogether, the US has over 13,000 aircraft compared to China's 3,300. That includes nearly 1,800 fighters, 1,000 attack helicopters, and over 900 transport aircraft. The majority of the fleet is modern and high-tech, including updated F-16s, F-35 Lightning II stealth fighters, and the legendary B-52 and B-2 Spirit heavy bombers. When it comes to sheer firepower, the U.S. Air Force has the upper hand, and that gap only gets bigger in a long fight. America's got about 605 refueling tankers, enough to keep its jets in the air, flying longer, hitting harder, and striking more often than anything China can match. With the U.S.'s advantages and the logistical nightmare of a land invasion, the fight would almost certainly start from the air and the sea. Waves of missiles and drones would hammer China's defenses, air bases, ships, command centers, and maybe even nuclear sites. China and North Korea wouldn't sit idly by, they would hit back fast, with missiles or even a preemptive strike of their own. And that is where everything starts to spiral. It's hard to pin down exactly how many types of drones and missiles each side has, but China and North Korea likely hold the edge in sheer numbers. According to NVIDIA CEO Jensen Huang, China is nanoseconds behind the US in most advanced technologies, including weaponry. China claims to have a range of hypersonic missiles like the DF-17, a medium-range ballistic missile, the YJ-21 hypersonic anti-ship ballistic missile, and the recently unveiled CJ-1000 hypersonic cruise missile. This might be one of the few areas where the US is behind. It's still testing its first hypersonic missiles, while no one really knows how systems like the Patriot or THAAD would cope with missiles traveling in excess of Mach 5, with the ability to maneuver in flight. And as the world's factory, China has got massive production edge. It can turn out drones and missiles faster than the US, and it probably already has. The US's stockpiles have been significantly depleted as a result of supplying large quantities to Ukraine, many of which could take years to replenish. During the Iran-Israel war, it was reported the US burned through a quarter of its THAAD interceptor missile stockpiles in just 12 days. These will take 2 years to replace. North Korea, for its part, has been relentlessly testing new ballistic missiles for the past few years. Both it and China claim to have intercontinental ballistic missiles capable of hitting the US East Coast, and they definitely have the range to strike US bases all the way out in Guam. Not to be outdone, the US has its own array of missiles and drones, including the Tomahawk. The US also leads the way in radar and threat detection, and it backs it up with defense systems like THAAD and powerful electronic warfare technology. China's radar, threat detection, electronic warfare, and air defense systems are also considered among the most advanced in the world. The key difference is that they are concentrated almost entirely in and around China, while America's are spread out across the globe. So, how will a clash between these nations play out? It's hard to say. With rare exceptions, advanced US weaponry has yet to engage in actual combat with the Chinese or North Koreans. And as we've seen in Ukraine, as soon as the firing starts, both sides quickly identify weaknesses and act to mitigate them. That creates an ongoing game of cat and mouse between developing threats and anti-threat systems. That's the first thing that makes a war between the US and China, joined by North Korea, such a chilling prospect. Will the US aircraft carriers be able to provide decisive force or be sitting ducks for Chinese hypersonic missiles? Will the Chinese threat detection be able to spot and target the US F-35s and B-1s before they can deliver untold destruction? And then there is the second terrifying prospect, escalation into nuclear war. The US could wipe China and North Korea from the map several times over with its nukes, but together they've got hundreds of warheads and missiles to deliver them, enough to turn huge parts of America into a wasteland. If one side, particularly the North Koreans, felt that defeat was inevitable, it is extremely likely that nukes would be brought to bear. China's nuclear doctrine follows a strict no-first-use policy. In other words, it won't launch nukes unless someone hits first. If someone does strike, China can hit back hard enough to prevent a second attack. So it's unlikely China would fire the first nuclear shot. But if US bases, ships, and aircraft were being hit by Chinese missile strikes, Washington's first strike doctrine means that the conflict could quickly escalate to the use of tactical nuclear weapons. And if it did, all bets would be off. When it comes to military strength, China is seriously flexing. But Beijing's ambitions go far beyond the numbers. Watch China's World War III plan to see how they're preparing for the next global conflict, or click on this video instead.